Mate, you've been looking into hair transplants for the past few weeks.
My name's Dan and this is my hair transplant journey.
So when I think of hair transplants, I think of those guys with huge bald patches on the back of their head like they've just been shaved. Do you think there's still a stigma around getting a hair transplant?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea, the very concept of like going overseas to have this done is still, you know, a lot of people would question it, and my friend did it, and that's kind of how I got onto this story. But I think the idea of like hair loss is still a bit stigmatized in that, like, for men, hair is such an important thing. And I just know that if I started experiencing hair loss, and luckily enough I haven't, I'd consider it as well.
So yeah, if you were to rank body image concerns for men, where would hair be sitting?
It'd be like right at the top, I think. The thing about hair is it's one thing you can easily control. You know, you have power over your hair, whereas there's other things with your body that you just have no control over. So I think for men, getting a new haircut has such a big impact on their confidence.
That's interesting that you said you have control over it, because I guess one aspect of aging especially is that you can't control the amount of hair you lose. Is that sort of like an impending fear?
Totally, and I think that's part of the stigma, right? It's like, you actually have no control over hair loss. That's why I kind of more mean a good haircut can do a lot for a man's confidence. But in the same way, when you're losing hair, having a new fresh head of hair is almost like having a haircut. It makes men typically feel younger, and you know, a lot of the men I spoke to, they feel more attractive when they've had a hair transplant as well.
So I keep hearing about Australians going to Turkey and Thailand to do a hair transplant. What exactly is a hair transplant? I've never actually looked into it.
Yeah, I hadn't really looked into it either, and I didn't really know it was a thing. You can do it in Australia. It's very viable in Australia. One of the guys I spoke to for the article, Tom Robb, he was quoted about $20,000 to $25,000, and he went, oh, I probably can't afford that or justify that. So he started doing research, and on Reddit, there's just millions of forums of people documenting their experiences. So there's photos and a full forum posts about their experiences. And there are some really good places in Thailand, as well as Turkey, who have really good, you know, techs that are licensed. You can sort of treat it like a holiday. You go overseas, you know, a lot of people will spend that first week having a holiday, and then they'll have the procedure done.
So I'm thinking overseas surgical procedure, maybe not the best idea sometimes. What are the risks of getting a hair transplant done overseas?
So I spoke to two experts about this. One of them literally was saying that any cosmetic procedure done overseas is risky. And that could just be as simple as insurance. It's really hard to find insurance that will cover you for medical procedures done overseas. But then there's other things that you need to consider, like blood-borne viruses. Anything that's dealing with blood overseas, you've got to be really careful about. But then when it comes to like more specifically for hair transplants, there's a lot of techs that are operating that aren't licensed. They're not even, you know, registered in any way, and there's not much regulation in a lot of countries overseas for hair transplants. So you've got to do a lot of research to make sure that you're getting the right service and people that are actually, you know, qualified for the job. Because what can happen is, yeah, they over extract from parts of your hair, and then suddenly in 5 years when your hair starts growing back, it's, you know, botchy, and it's like there's spots everywhere, and then they need to pay heaps of money to have that sort of restored again. So it can end up being really expensive if you don't do your research.
I heard you spoke to a guy who had a hair transplant done at 21. Is it common for men to be losing their hair at that age?
It's usually the age where men start losing hair. Obviously this can continue on, and it varies from person to person. Tom noticed it when he was 19, and he had joked to his dad, who was 55 at the time, saying, I have less hair than you do. And I say joked, but I think it was something that really, and I was talking to him about this, like it had an impact on his confidence. Whenever he left the house, he'd put a hat on. He wouldn't even, like, he always thought about his hair. He was always trying to cover it up. He was almost like embarrassed of it, like subconsciously anyway. So he was always trying to, cover it.
Yeah, I can imagine that must have been hard for him if he had to wear a hat every single time he went out the house. So what was it like for him to make that decision to get a hair transplant?
So he'd been through a lot of routes, which most men try. So there's finasteride, which is a pill, a prescription pill to manage hair loss, and there's minoxidil as well, which is a topical cream. Both didn't really, you know, cure it, so to speak. They usually just manage it, and he was still noticing it. Eventually, he was recommended by his dermatologist to actually have a hair transplant in Australia. But then he went on Reddit forums and saw that he could save a lot of money by going overseas to have it done.
So how much did it actually cost him to do in the end?
So $11,000 for the hair transplant itself. But yeah, he was treating it like a holiday anyway. So I think, yeah, he certainly has no regrets about spending that money.
You did mention that some people do get botched jobs. So what happens to them?
I spoke to Dr. Russell Knudsen. He is a hair restoration doctor based in Australia, and he told me every single week he's seeing, or just about every week, he's seeing someone come back from overseas with a botched job, which is pretty, like, that's pretty intense for me to think that there's that many Australians going overseas and having these jobs done that are just like ruining their hair, and they've got like patchy hair regrowth. So yeah, his main takeaway is that you've got to do your research and be really careful about the clinics that you choose. That's not the most complicated surgery to restore it, but it is expensive.
You can fix it if
you can, but I mean, sometimes there's permanent scarring. There's a lot of like irreversible risk that you're taking. Scarring, that's the main one, but some like hair growth, you just can't. If you've over extracted at that point, you can't. You know, it's irreversible.
So it's causing even more baldness than you had to start with?
Yeah, or more patchiness, and the hair's regrowing in places where it shouldn't be. And you can imagine, like, if people have already gone to this extent because they're insecure about their hair, you can imagine how then they'd feel coming back with a worse head of hair.
Yeah, I would be pissed if I was paying that much to come back with worse hair than I started with.
Absolutely. And for men, as I said, like, your hair is just so front facing. Like, it means so much to men. So it's really tragic, actually. And I think one of the big takeaways there is just to do your research before you pay this money and go overseas.
So hair transplants right now are, you know, the big thing that everyone's going to do. Do you think that's going to continue into the future?
From my perspective anyway, I don't see why not. I think if anything, it'll probably increase more as more men talk about it and it's less stigmatized. And there's also a lot of evidence online of really good jobs where people have spent money and they're really happy with the results. So I don't see why, you know, I personally think it's a good thing. If men feel better for it, then that's all that really matters.